ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
There was a time when tech bros would just cringe.
I love this company. Yes!
Well, now they're cringe and also deeply involved in global politics.
I'm not just MAGA. I'm dark, gothic MAGA.
And one unexpected country is fighting back against the broligarchs. It's us. From If You're Listening, this is Australia versus the Internet. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
We're nearing the end of the election campaign, and thanks to all of you who've been in touch about topics and policies you wanted us to have a deeper look into. So far, we've considered energy, housing, defence policy, the backstories of the leaders, and political donations. And a lot of you also wanted to know more about childcare. So today, we're going to focus on that with investigative reporter Adele Ferguson, who's recently uncovered deep flaws, including the mistreatment and abuse of children. We'll look at what's on offer and determine which party's policies will really help to improve the sector. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Adele, in March, we brought our listeners your Four Corners investigation about a crisis in childcare. It really was incredible.
In this 1 hour special, the devastating reality of Australia's childcare crisis, we reveal systemic failures and the catastrophic impact of putting profit before care.
They don't care about your kids. They're there to make money, and that's the bottom line. They're there to make money.
And since then, you've really heard from a lot of parents, haven't you?
Oh, we've been inundated. We've had thousands of parents, educators, regulators and experts reach out, shocked and heartbroken by what we uncovered. It was a gruelling investigation and it exposed widespread safety breaches and neglect across Australia in childcare centres.
Yeah.
You know, things like toddlers strapped into high chairs for hours, force-fed, yanked, pulled, hit, horrifyingly cases of sexual abuse. The regulation is really deficient in so many ways. For example, there is the National Quality Standards, which go in and rate childcare centres. 10% of centres have never been rated, and the ones that have, the average reassessment cycle is every 4 years, which is way too slow to catch the problems.
All right, so given what you've found, this is a really important area to consider ahead of the election, not to mention that it's a huge election issue because there are so many children in childcare in this country, 1.5 million. So Anthony Albanese, he was asked during the second Leaders debate on the ABC what he hopes his big legacy will be, and he nominated childcare, didn't he?
He did.
Mr Albanese, what's the one big change you'd like to be remembered for?
Affordable childcare is one of the things that we're doing. We've already put measures in place, including in this term.
Peter Dutton mentioned childcare just once during his campaign launch, but he is promising the coalition will maintain spending on essential services.
We're not going to proceed with more than $100 billion of Labor's ineffectual measures. But in doing that, we still guarantee investment in essential services and critical areas of the economy like health and aged care, like childcare, veteran support and the NDIS.
So let's look at the subject of your big investigation, which really goes to the quality of care. Our listener, Paul, he had this question about the workers who are looking after our children.
With the recent report on childcare on Four Corners, it was worrying stuff, and it seemed like a lot of it came down to untrained and undertrained workers that have a really high turnover. What are the party's plans to get good, qualified people into the field and keep them there long term with better wages and better conditions?
Paul is right. One of the issues is pay. Childcare workers are really poorly paid. They're complaining of burnout. Courses are getting shorter, so there are questions over the quality of training. And Labor has committed $3.6 billion of taxpayer money to cover a 15% wage subsidy for educators. The first 10% kicked off in December, and another 5% will come in December this year. So that's a 15% wage rise, but only the centres that apply and commit to limit fee increases to 4.4% a year will take this up.
What more, though, do you think needs to be done when it comes to staffing? What do the experts say here?
They say that there needs to be a whole lot of change, and they have 4 points. The first is this fast tracking of childcare qualifications needs to stop. They've been crunched down to just a few months to get a Certificate 3 in childcare. And so too many educators are being pushed through these low-quality training programs that don't properly prepare them for the job, and that puts children at risk. The second thing that experts say is regulation needs a major overhaul. We need to have more spot checks, genuine unannounced visits to childcare centres. Right now, many regulators don't come to these childcare centres at all, or they don't have any understanding of what childcare is. They don't have a background in it. The third thing the experts are saying is there needs to be more enforcement of the law, not just warnings. So often an educator might be involved in inappropriate discipline of a child, and they'll get an enforceable undertaking where they're told, just don't do it again. And the fourth thing is there has to be better oversight. Who is allowed to own and operate childcare centres? Because right now what we've seen is there are these big chains, private enterprise. They may have a lot of centres that have got poor quality going on, and yet they're continually opening up new businesses.
And putting profit before the children. As you mentioned to us before, not a bad idea too, Adele, for parents maybe just to pop in at a random time sometimes, just to have a bit of a check?
That's exactly right. Instead of saying we're coming to pick up our child at 4 p.m, come in at lunchtime. That's what educators are saying, and then you can find out what might be going on.
All right, well, another listener, Julie, she thinks childcare should really be considered in the same way that education is.
Good morning. These are the things my husband and I would like the political leaders to address. Assistance to states to bring childcare under the Education Department.
Well, Julie's idea makes a lot of sense, and actually childcare is already under education departments both federally and at the state level, but it isn't treated the same. It often gets lower funding, less oversight and less status. And so the experts I've spoken to argue further integration with the broader education system could enhance quality and consistency, because there's been so many studies done about between 0 to 5 years of age is when 90% of the brain develops. So you really need to start looking at it as early learning, education and care.
Okay, all right. Well, let's look now at the affordability of childcare because it is so expensive. Bronwyn, she's really concerned about childcare subsidies that reduce as you earn more.
Hi ABC News Daily. Please dig into the Labor policy around the childcare subsidy. It just seems that the more we get paid, the less that we are subsidised, which defeats the purpose of being paid more and striving in our jobs to get paid more. If you could dig into what their policy is going to be and also what the opposition's will be, that would be excellent.
So at the moment, the subsidy you receive depends on how much you earn, of course. It's a sliding scale. So, for instance, if as a family you earn more than $500,000, $533,000 a year, you won't get anything. If you earn $82,000, you'll receive a 90% subsidy, as an example.
Yes, that's right. And another key point, you get less back if you don't work or study for a number of hours. And that's a key point. It's called the activity test. And that's the big difference between the two main political parties in this election campaign.
Yeah, so Labor's big ticket item when it comes to childcare policy is about guaranteeing 3 days of subsidised care for pretty much every Australian family. They want to get rid of that activity test.
Yes, that's right. And that isn't just a promise. It was passed in Parliament back in February. If Labor is re-elected from 2026, they'll guarantee at least 3 days of subsidised childcare for all families earning under $530,000 a year, which means the vast majority of the population will be eligible. But it's all about removing the activity test, which is the clincher. And the thing is, in terms of working out how much you can get in subsidies, it is so complicated and a lot of families don't actually understand it. You know, at the moment, under the activity test, for example, parents have to work, study, or be looking for work for at least 16 hours a fortnight to qualify for more than minimal subsidised care, and it can be really confusing.
Okay, but Peter Dutton, we think, wants to actually bring that activity test back. That's according to a report in the Australian newspaper, although Peter Dutton hasn't really been talking about this issue much on the campaign trail.
No, he's been very quiet on childcare altogether, but the Australian did report last week that the Coalition would reinstate the activity test, and they haven't come out and said this is not the case, so you would assume that it is. And they actually voted against Labor's policy when it went through Parliament. And their argument is pretty simple. The $15 billion that is spent by governments on childcare subsidies a year, they say should go to families who are working, studying, or actively looking for work, not just anyone.
All right, so that goes to the cost of childcare, but then there's also the issue of access, because it is really hard to get a child into a centre. So on that front, the Labor Party has promised $1 billion fund to build new centres, and that's been matched by the Coalition. But Adele, does any of this really make it easier to get your child into a centre?
Well, that's 160 centres over 4 years, so it's not really going to fix the shortage, particularly in some regional areas. There are no childcare centres at all. It's called childcare deserts. So there is a real problem with a shortage, and 160 just won't fix that. And there also needs to be proper guardrails around it. Otherwise, the problems regarding quality will continue.
Well, Adele, you have looked so extensively at this industry. So tell me, who do you think has the better policy here, Labor or the Coalition? Who's going to make it actually better?
Well, for affordability, you'd have to say Labor, because they're actually looking at the activity test, which many experts say when you have these hours that are involved, it affects the poorest families. So Labor will be better in that sense. But neither party have the answers when it comes to quality of care.
So that's what the major parties are doing, and that's your assessment of it. But the Greens have a childcare platform too that you've been looking at, and it does have some merit, doesn't it?
It does. They've called for a royal commission. They've also pitched a $1.5 billion plan to help clean up the sector, including establishing an early education and care commission, which would be a national regulator that oversees quality standards, which we don't have. And they're also calling for universal early childhood education and care.
Everyone should be able to afford good quality early learning, but too many families are struggling with the cost, and some can't even find a spot at all. In a wealthy country like ours, we can make early childhood education free and universal.
Offering 50 hours of free care a week for every child, regardless of family income or how many hours you work.
Okay, so they won't form government, but they could, I guess, depending on how the election goes, have some influence, particularly if there's a minority government.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the real clincher in all of this is you can't just throw money at the sector. You also have to look at what the underlying problems, why is there a crisis? And there are many issues that need to be addressed that the main parties are not really addressing.
Yeah, so whichever party forms government next week, I'm guessing you'll continue to focus on what's really happening in childcare centres across the country. There is so much at stake, isn't there?
Oh, there is absolutely so much at stake. We've been given access to thousands of pages of internal documents from the New South Wales regulator, which point to deep structural failure. And they really need to be fixed because this is our future generations that we're talking about here, and these little kids don't have a voice.
Adele Ferguson is an investigative reporter with the ABC. You can catch her childcare investigation on Four Corners on ABC iView. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed and Sam Dunn. Audio production by Adair Shepherd. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. Thanks for listening.